Okay, hello everyone. I'm so glad that you could all join us tonight. My name is Beth Hinderleiter. I am director of the Duke Hall Gallery of Fine Art at James Madison University. And I am happy to welcome you to our conversation tonight with Sarah Phillips and Lacey Miner. And we are going to have a look virtually at their exhibits, which are currently in the gallery now, and have a conversation about their projects. And then at the end, save time for questions and answers. And so since this is a webinar format, please share your questions in the chat function as we're going on. And then after we hear from both Sarah and Lacey, we'll have time for your questions at the end. So I'd like to introduce Sarah and Lacey very quickly, and then turn to a quick virtual tour of some images of their exhibits. The gallery is open tomorrow, Tuesday, as well as Wednesday of this week from 11 to 5 for people to come and see their projects. So Lacey Miner is an MFA candidate at the School of Art, Design, and Art History, and her project, Icarus Rooted, examines the life cycle of potatoes and produces lumen prints with potatoes in order to think about how, in particular, the potato is a metaphor for drug addiction, and through working through guilt as well as loss of family and friends during the opioid epidemic. Sarah Phillips joins us tonight to talk about her project, which is And All the Things That Grew on the Ground. And in her project, she is navigating themes of ritual as well as habit and transformation. And she's going to share with us about many of the different aspects of her work. And Sarah, would you like to share your screen since you are the one with the presenter privileges now?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we can start with you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what inspired the body of work in And Everything That Grew on the Ground.
Great. So am I just walking through images quickly and then giving an
Yes, show us some
overview?
images.
All right, give me 2 seconds to find that again. All right. Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, sorry for the delay. Cool. Great. I'll just give you a quick kind of overview of what I have in the gallery and what I've been thinking about for the last kind of couple of years. So this is a combination of in-still images and then just some stills and some video. Great. So I have 4 pieces in here right now. So the 4 pieces are Ascent, a piece called Distance, a set of pieces called Untitled Box, and then a piece called Laundry. And so I'll talk you through all 4 of those quickly. So the first one, and one of the ones that I've been working on for the longest, is called Ascent. So a lot of my work recently, I've been starting with objects or a singular image or the idea of a singular image, and then sort of extrapolating about as far as I can from the object, seeing how far I can pull it, and then sort of stemming into video and performance, and then compressing it back down to its relationship with the object and how I can bring that into the space, and what is the relationship with the initial object, the initial sort of image that pushes me through the work, and then the performance that usually ensues. So I'll show you a couple of stills. So it was a performance in 3 cycles. I went to Assateague Island, which is where we used to go when I was when I was a child, and specifically there was an instance where my sister went missing there when she was 3, and we thought she had drowned. And so I think a lot about this place as like a place of change and this potential loss that didn't quite come to fruition, but sort of the idea of loss and the cyclical, and of course all the symbolism that's attached to ladders. My family is very, very religious, and that's the community that I come from. They're super Protestant, and so a lot of the imagery comes from sort of the scriptural texts that I sort of grew up on and the mythology that goes with that. And my relationship with those things. So this piece, I think, is really about access and failure and wanting to reach something that's never going to work, right? I'm climbing this ladder in the ocean and it's falling and it's falling. So I'll pull you through some stills and I'll show you a quick clip from the video too, if that's okay. Oops. Good. So here's the ladder again. And it was just 3 variations on what would happen if I would climb it. And usually I would climb it until either the ocean took the ladder away or it just fell apart and became unusable. So let me see if I can make the video play. So in the gallery, I have all 3 cycles playing simultaneously, and sort of in the same rhythm of waves as they sort of move in and out. So the pacing of the video matches that. I won't make you watch it. It's probably enough for me to get the idea. Good. So yeah, they're sort of paced based on sort of breath length and also tide length and what is the relationship between sort of body and landscape. And that comes up a lot in a lot of my work, and I write a lot about both of those things as well. This is a quick shot of what it looks like installed in the gallery. So the idea of the ascent upwards and access, and then how do we relate to that imagery as well. So the second piece I'm going to talk about, it's called Laundry. Again, just a brief overview. So these objects come up a lot in my work, but my grandmother died a few years ago, and when she passed, we were going through her house, and she had boxed up, actually bagged in these weird little Ziploc bags, about 100 dresses that were hers and her mother's and her mother's mother's. So they're about 100 years old, the oldest of them, and then sort of generationally. And my mother and I can't share clothes. She's much taller than I am, and all of these dresses fit me, so I took them and sort of been thinking about the idea of what does it mean to inherit this object in clothing, and specifically expectation or gendered expectation that goes with receiving clothing from someone, or what is your role, and sort of even like opening them up and smelling them and smelling her and smelling mothballs, and what does it mean to have this really olfactory response to this object. And there were no instructions left with them, just like what year they were from. So were they meant for me, were they not meant for me? And then, when I put them on, they're tearing, they're ripping, but they're also dirty and they're unusable now. So in order to sort of reconcile myself with her and that loss and the idea of expectation that comes with textile, I did a series of performances. I actually did 4, and I live streamed 3 of them, and then I did the 4th one, which is the one that's presented in the gallery, which was more of a long form and private one. At the very beginning of COVID, and then again recently, where I started to, I couldn't find much information on how to treat the fabric. I wanted it to be clean, and so I have really sensitive skin, so I have some soap that's really natural and organic, and so I was like, okay, well, if I can treat my skin a certain way, then maybe I can treat the fabric like I treat an extension of my skin. And so I did these series where I'm bathing, but I'm also washing the clothing at the same time, and so I called it Laundry, and then I hang them in the windows, and I've started thinking a lot about sort of light and what happens when they're clean. I actually found out that I'm super allergic to some of the dyes, which was super exciting, and I couldn't breathe for a while, but the idea of light coming through, and then it becomes this like sort of stained glass, sort of holy-esque space, and what does it mean to sanctify a space and make it sacred, and the idea of washing and how that relates to sort of my upbringing and the religious background as well. What does it mean to be cleansed or clean, and is it better to clean something and have it lose some of its functionality as part of the risk of the cleansing, or to preserve it but not use it? And so those are some of the questions that I was thinking about. Again, I'm not going to make you watch the whole video, but I'll give you a quick. See if I can make it. I'll skip maybe forward a bit. And I'm just hanging in the windows and letting them sort of dry and become part of the room and the landscape that I'm existing in a different and new way, and letting it affect that space. Enough to get the idea. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Good. Good. And so here's some of the images of how it's installed in the space. So I have the full video projected, and then I have some projections in the soapy water as well. And then the work distance I also did with one of the dresses, one that wasn't actually finished. It was sort of raw and sitting in the pile. And so what I did was I wore the dress to the place where my sister and I used to look for shark's teeth, sort of the idea of looking for history. And then it's a state park near my parents' house. And I took it to the beach with a treadle sewing machine that I had found, and sort of in situ stitched it into a kite and attempted to fly it and fly it and fly it until it was unflyable, right? The idea of sort of unmaking while making, and then having this loss where it crashes and it doesn't work, and the frustration of the failure of that. There's a lot of sort of histories about kites and its idea of sort of, it's used on, I believe, White Monday in Europe. You, especially in Greece, you like fly it as part of the like resurrection practice, and you're flying it, and then you let it go as a symbolic gesture about sin and loss and letting go of things. And so it's a little bit hard to see. It's really interesting in the gallery space, but what I've done is I was able to get the video and attach it to the sewing machines, that when you're stitching, it's also propelling the 16mm video forward. So this is me attempting to make it go by stitching with it, and then this is the video that you're able to see if you are successfully stitching with the machine. It's really hard to capture on video successfully, so I'm just showing you what it is. So again, it's sort of the question of what is the relationship between the ultimate object and the object that began the performance, and then how does it come back to have a relationship with that as well. Great. I'm going to stop that. Cool. And then the last piece that I'm going to address is called Untitled Box. Again, this is really just sort of my attempt to think about my relationship with the spaces that I occupy. So this started out, I journal a lot. I like to write, but I always think of it as like sort of a performative action, even if I'm writing privately. And so especially with COVID, just wanting to re-engage with spaces in a new way. I work, we're virtual all the time, but I also work on a farm, and I was feeling a lot of dissonance between the times when my hands were like in the dirt and like making things and harvesting things and feeling very connected to even like what I was eating versus and what I was growing and being nurturing, and then being on the internet all the time, and thinking about how sort of growing up, like going into nature or going into the woods is an activity in and of itself, but as an adult we have to have like a reason, like you have to go running or you're a hiker, and just not spending time outside with my hands in the ground, but missing that sensation. And so I sort of combined the two things, and I made myself a type kit where I could type directly into the landscape and sort of communicate with it in that way. And so I started doing this and documenting it in different ways. I wasn't sure that I wanted it to be something legible for the reader, and I ended up sort of making it into this audio thing, but where you have to listen to sort of the landscape to experience the text part. I don't know, I'm sort of still struggling with that, but I'll show you some quick clips, at least of the action of what it means to type into a landscape, and sort of the rhythmic practice of that as well. And it's more of a ritual than something with an end goal, right? That everything is temporary, it gets washed away pretty quickly or tracked over. And I think that's an important component too. Like I could make something permanent, but that's not the point. It's about re-engaging with my body, with the spaces that I'm in, and seeing what comes from that relationship. Here's how I want to. Okay, that's probably enough of that. and then just playing with it in the space and what does that look like and how to get people to re-engage in a different way. Okay, that's probably a good introduction to my work and what I've put in the gallery. So
Thank you so much, Sarah. Lacey, would you tell us a little bit about your project and show us some images from Icarus Rooted?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to show a video kind of walking through the installation. Let's see. So this work, Icarus Rooted, is in dedication to 4 family members I've lost to heroin overdose. My cousin Alec passed away in the summer of 2019 to heroin overdose. His body was found in a hotel outside of St. Louis, Missouri, where I grew up. And losing him in the summer was kind of poignant because my best memories of him are from our childhoods that we spent mainly together in the summers, where our parents would drop us off at our great-grandparents' house, who lived in Pearl, Illinois, this very rural town. And my great-grandmother lived there, and she had 168 acres. And she would send us out into the fields to dig up her potatoes. And so this body of work is kind of an ode to that time of our childhood and also a dedication to anyone who's flown too close to the sun. And so I was really interested in creating this dedicated body of work with the potato in mind, because of its connection to my childhood with my cousin, and also because the more I researched into the potato, the more similarities I found to the life of the potato and the life of my cousin. So the potatoes that we eat are domesticated, and the solanine that's in them, which is a toxin, has been bred into dormancy. And the potatoes that we eat now, when they're exposed to the light, that solanine develops again. And while it's there as this protector to ward off like pest and disease, if left to develop fully, it will actually end up killing the potato itself. And there's something about this relationship in relation to the opioid epidemic, in which people are prescribed opioids as painkillers and then often end up with awful addictions, which is what happens to cousin. And so I'm going to try to switch over to some photos. So let's see. So I kind of have a few different bodies of work that all pertain to the potato. So I have these material pieces that are made with potato stamps. I have the physical potatoes growing, and then these lumen prints as well. And so the lumen prints are developed in the sunlight. Potatoes are, I put the potatoes on them that I've been growing, and as they start to die, I'll put them on the lumen print to try to capture their existence. A lot of my work is trying to grapple with the idea of impermanence and the way that memory changes over time. And so there are 99 potatoes in this exhibition. They represent a life lost each day to heroin overdose in America. And so during the exhibition, these potatoes that are growing will eventually die because they haven't been put underground. And when they die in this exhibition, the potato will be removed and then replaced with a new one to represent those numbers that are lost every day. And so I've kind of brought the underground above ground for the viewer to walk through. It's like a pseudo underground. I guess that's pretty good start to what I've been working on.
Great. Well, let me follow up with a question about your use of light. You talked a little bit about the relationship of light developing that toxic chemical in potatoes, but you're also working with light in the photographs. Could you tell us maybe a little bit about how light functions in the project?
Right, so light is kind of a little bit of the enemy in this project because light exposure is what causes the potatoes to develop the solanine and then ends up killing them. And so using that light to then capture the lives of these potatoes as they're rotting away on these photograms, I really like the juxtaposition and the dichotomy of that. So yeah, light is definitely important to the body of work.
Thank you. Sarah, it seems that both of your exhibitions deal with change over time, with impermanence and with loss, but I was hoping you could say a little more specifically, right, about impermanence in your installation, because there seemed to be so much about like they're typing into the landscape and that impermanence, or of the laundry, which is both, being preserved but maybe decomposing. And how do you use impermanence in your work?
Yeah, I think that's pretty dominant, I think, in a lot of my work. And then there's sort of the two components, right? There's the impermanence of like the initial performance, and then there's the grappling of the idea of impermanence in what happens to the documentation of the performance afterwards. And that's a little bit maybe of a looser relationship. I think almost all of my work starts with the idea of impermanence, or like grappling with the idea that we are impermanent, or parts of us are impermanent, and we're losing them. And I think impermanence and loss are sort of intertwined in a way that we can't untangle. So yeah, I mean, for the typing piece, the Untitled Box, it's like sort of on the nose, right? With the typing into the soil or the sand, it goes away usually before I even leave. And so that's an impermanence where I don't intend for it to be permanent, and it's really not even for anyone else to see. And like that, of course, makes it difficult to think about what happens after. I usually take some soil with me, and then I've made inks out of them, and all of that feels like a contrived way of dealing with something that was intended to be an impermanent and like momentary gesture of communication. So I think that's a big part of the questions that I'm asking with that work constantly right now. And then with the kite work, which is distance, I made this kite out of a dress that wasn't even finished yet, and then I took the dress that was falling apart and I made it into this kite. But the silk was like super, it was 100-year-old silk, so every time I stitched, it also like destroyed the core of the fabric. So the idea of simultaneous making and unmaking was super present there. And then in the act of flying the kite, I was also destroying it constantly. So I was like destroying one object to make another object, which then got destroyed, and then it got taken away by the tide. And sometimes I got pieces back, and sometimes I didn't. And I had originally intended for that piece to like make a permanent kite object, and that never really came to fruition because that wasn't, I think, ultimately what the piece was about. It was about the dissolution of the object and the acceptance of the loss of this thing. I had to decide to make the dress into something else, and then I lost both the dress and the next object. So I think both failure and impermanence were super important to that work. And then the ladders, I was attempting to do something that was never going to happen, right? So the idea of the success that was unattainable, but also the ladders were falling apart as I was climbing them, and I sort of went until they didn't stay with me anymore. So there was, I think it factored in that way. And then with the laundry work too, as I'm washing these dresses, they're falling apart on me, or they're not, or I'm stitching them back up. And the idea that they won't be usable until I wash them, but in washing them, I'm risking their usability and their permanence as well. So I think it's sort of pervasive in the content that I'm addressing with all the pieces. I don't know if that answered the question very well.
Good, thank you. Lacey, there is a question from Lisa Tubach who says, can you please share with the audience your interest in exploring unusual materials and how they relate to the addicted body in particular?
Yeah, so I was really interested in materials that are used to cut heroin with, and I think most people would be really surprised what you might find. Things like plaster and clay and shoe polish, strychnine. There's a lot of things that is used to stretch a batch of heroin, baking soda, things like that. And so I was taking all of this really bizarre assortment of materials and making drawings with them and dyeing materials with them. In the material pieces that I showed earlier, I am like injecting this embroidery thread through the back of the piece. It's kind of like a merge between felting and embroidering. And it leaves these sort of like track marks on the other side with these threads that have been dyed with materials that heroin is often cut with.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, there is a question from Emmy Garcia who asks, in your laundry piece, did any of the dresses completely deteriorate? And what did you do when a dress was destroyed? Did you keep the remains or did you discard them? I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was trying not to interrupt Lacey. None of them like deteriorated on contact, like none of them were like dust at the end of it, but there's a lot of moments, and some of them made it into the videos that I kept and some didn't, where I'm like putting it on and I hear a tear and I like gasp, right? Because it's this moment of I made the choice to risk its structure in this way and I'm at fault for its breaking. Yeah, I always keep the pieces. I think that's actually how I got started on the kite piece. Was I was washing them and there were these tears and there were some that were just like not going to survive my next move. So what can I do to honor its presence in the moment? Yeah, if I have a minute, I might go grab one of the more impermanent looking ones at this juncture. But yeah, so definitely several deteriorated beyond use, but they would have anyway, and I always keep them for whatever I can use them for. Good question, Em.
Great. So if anyone else has questions, please put them in the chat. We can also work to unmute you. But let me ask you a question in the meantime. And I was also wondering if maybe you had questions for each other, particularly about your work, but maybe this could be something that would be a question for both of you, because it seems like, there's a lot of process and the emphasis on process in your works, and that contributes, I think, certainly a performative nature to your installations, and I maybe wanted to get you to think a little bit maybe about how maybe it might be different in each of your installations, the thought or the focus on the performativity or the nature of foregrounding process.
Sarah, do you want to start that one?
There were like a lot of sub questions in that question. I'm taking a second to think about it. I don't know. I'm gonna, I think, latch on to the part about sort of the ways that we differ in our approach to the performativity of the installation. I think that was one component of the question. Am I understanding that correctly, Beth?
Yes, and I think you both kind of approach showing the materiality and the process of creation as a big component of the artwork, but maybe differently. So I thought maybe that could be something that you could answer the same question and think about how maybe you have similarities, but also differences in your work.
Okay. It was like a really complicated way to ask it and then a very simple one. Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm looking at Lacey's right now, and it's really nice with her work, with your work, Lacey, to be able to see like all these images, all these photograms that are documenting the different stages of the decay and both the like growing. So I guess that again, sort of the simultaneous making and unmaking, where you can see all these time periods at once, and then with the ones that you're actually growing, if I'm understanding correctly. And I also really love the way that your shelves are stacking just enough with the weight of the potatoes. But in all these different stages of their existence and of their deterioration, and it makes this sort of lovely but non-linear narrative right immediately when you're looking at it. And I think that's really nice. And with mine, I've been struggling with whether I want like the result, right? Like the potato for you is like is the process and the result both. And there's this nice sort of wrestling back and forth in the time periods and the documentation of its stages of decay and sort of grieving of itself. And with my work, I'm never sure if the result is the object or the documentation or what. So I think we differ a lot in the way that we handle those things. And I think the way that you're handling it, Lacey, with the potatoes is sort of poetic in terms of you can just see the cycle right there. And then mine's a little bit more scattered and nonlinear in terms of what is the result of the work, is the performance, that work. And I feel like the potatoes for your work are like the performers in the space. I don't know. And then I go back and forth about whether the work is the performer or the viewer and what's the level of engagement there. I don't know. Lacey, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would really agree with all of that. I think in your work, you you do a lot of like offsite filming and things like that, and it seems like the places that these things happen are really relevant to your work, and then they come to be in these spaces that um, don't necessarily relate, but they take over these spaces in this really beautiful way. And you almost bring that area that you filmed in into the gallery spaces. Whereas I feel like what I'm making, what I've been making this semester, it's not really relevant to the space outside of the gallery. Like that's not really important. That all these um, potatoes were growing on my kitchen counters and things like that. Like that didn't feel important to necessarily showcase. And so yeah, I think space is a big place where we differ.
Yeah, I was just thinking we could almost swap titles and it would still be fine.
I think you're right.
And also I was looking at like your potatoes, you have this like mausoleum of them, and that maybe that's a poor word choice, but like the thing that you've eliminated from their growth, for at least visually, is the soil, and then I just have literal piles of soil on my side, and I think there's some interesting dynamic happening there. Oh, we have received some questions.
Yes. Rebecca asks, Sarah, can you tell us about the content, the written content in the Untitled Box? Was it content or was it asemic or a pansemic process? And I Googled what asemic means, and it means using lines and symbols that look like writing but have no meaning, because I didn't know what that was.
Oh yeah. No, it was content. It was written, but it was written sort of directly at the land. So not with an audience in mind, although understanding that an audience was possible, although unlikely, for the space. So communicating directly with the soil, and I don't tend to present it obliquely with the work. Right now it's saved as audio, and if you're really listening to the motion of making and writing, you can just barely hear it, so you have to pay really good attention and get really close to it, because it was important to me that it brought the audience back like physically in the face of it. But no, I mean the content is just communicating. Sometimes I'm thanking it, sometimes I'm just acknowledging its presence in our shared space, but communicating with the soil and not with a potential passerby. If that answers your question, Rebecca, I'm not sure. But it's textual, but it's directed at the ground.
And Kathy asks a related question to our previous question about what might be similar or different in your work. Kathy asks, have you been influenced by each other in this exhibit?
Oh, I mean, I'd say, like, maybe not in this exhibit specifically, but we talk in the hallway and when we're doing stuff, not just in the hallway, but in life, we're always talking about what we're making and how would you accomplish this? I know we had a lot of conversations about lumens when I was making some, but they weren't feeling right for me, but then they were exactly what I think Lacey was looking for, and then always asking each other what we would do or what's valuable and having conversations like that. That sounds very generic and non-specific, Kathy. I apologize. Maybe Lacey has a better example.
Well, I think, in this grad program that is, so close, where, we're the only two in our year, I kind of think that over these 3 years, we kind of have been like dancing around this kind of central something that I don't know that I can name, but talking about different things, if that makes any sense. Just, I guess, influence in being so, like, we're the only two in our year, and we're kind of the only feedback that we get for the most part, especially now that we're online. And so I think that that's just kind of turned into an inevitable thing, but yeah.
Thanks. Laura Katzman asks, for both of you, where do you see your work leading? Do you envision building on what you've engaged in here, or do you see beyond these particular themes and materials to explore new directions?
It's kind of hard to say because I don't know that I ever feel like I've ever fully explored something and it's felt done before. And so I feel like I could keep going with this topic forever and keep finding new ways. I think as this body of work has evolved, it's taken a lot of different avenues over the years, and uh, each one more exciting than the last. Like this work kind of started off as just potato stamps marking like pathways through a cemetery, and then it evolved into the bizarre subculture of stamp bag printmaking with that heroin can be distributed in, and then into these material pieces, and then lumens, and then to the overall installation with the potatoes. So I think that there's a lot more that I could do with this content.
Yeah, I think mine too. About a year ago, I had a significant sort of shift in the way that I was working, and I kept like, I don't know, reaching for projects because I was interested in the material process. I like material research, and I like processes, and was feeling very frustrated because nothing ever felt finished or even purposeful. And I started shifting back to sort of semi-autobiographical work, or just allowing myself to approach image making or narrative making as a question of what would I, if I could do anything, what would I want to do to sort of process my position in the world, and how does that relate back to my understanding of images and the iconography I've sort of grown up with, and how do I reflect on that as an adult, woman. And I think that direction is comfortable and makes sense and sort of allows me to ask deeper questions, but also do the materials research that I love. And what I've been seeing, and I think those of you who have worked in spaces with know that I'm a very messy worker, and I'm very materials heavy. I think, and I tend to go through a lot of materials. I habitually am a little bit wasteful with just wanting to consume materials and make and make and make. And I've seen my work streamline just a little bit, and a lot actually, in terms of what it is and how much of a gesture a piece is. I think I've gone from more grand object gestures to moving towards something a little bit smaller and more poetic. And I think also involving text. I've done a lot more writing to accompany the work that I'm showing now, and including it even in the Untitled Box. And so I think moving towards the smaller and the more gestural is definitely a direction that I want to work in, and the more reflective feels like a direction that I want to work in. And sort of this idea of visual journaling of what my experiences feels like a direction maybe that I'll continue to work into. So yes.
Thanks. And Tyler Walker had a follow-up question, which was also related. She had asked about, with your next steps. She says, both of your works speak on ephemeral parts of life. So will that extend to what happens when you take down these exhibitions?
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, I'm just starting to think about what happens, right? Like, I'm not gonna bring a 200-pound sewing machine to my next apartment. Like, that's just not practical. And so I think at the end of exhibitions, it becomes a question of what was important. Is it the documentation? Is it the machine? Is it the stitching? Is it the dress? I will keep the dresses, but maybe not the kite. It's like a disaster. So it becomes this question of acknowledging the ephemeral and then distilling it if you even need to keep anything, or is even just the conversation about what I did really the valuable component? Probably not. But sort of filtering what becomes valuable or what is worth keeping, especially when you're addressing the ephemerality of that exact object. So in terms of taking this exhibition down, what do we keep? I'm not sure. Do I keep the ladders? Probably not. They're huge and they smell bad. So like what it forces the question of what artifacts are even part of the artwork, and what gets sort of left to compost or given back to the community or repurposed. My sister already stole one of the ladders and started hanging quilts on it. Like, what's the next life of the object, I think, is a more interesting question, and fits with the idea of the questioning of the ephemeral and the permanent. What about you, Lacey?
Well, a large part of my installation is the potatoes, and they definitely will not survive the exhibition. So because you can't go out and
Yeah.
plant potatoes that you bought in the store because they've come from different parts of the world, and you could be introducing disease to local flora. And so
Are they still
these
edible?
potatoes. Sorry.
Are they still edible?
Yeah.
Are they safe?
Yeah. Well, not when the solenoid develops.
Right.
But before that, yeah, yeah. Because a lot of the potatoes that we see in the stores here come from like Mexico and things like that. So um, yeah, these potatoes, they don't have an existence past this exhibition. They have to die.
Rebecca has a question. She asks, do you think visual artists have a burden now to be agents of societal change? Or is the macro embedded in the individual action or investigation?
That's an excellent question. And I'll answer as I've started attacking the question. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that's a question that, I mean, I don't think either of us has an answer to. Maybe Lacey, you know more than like some secret knowledge, but I think there's a lot of maybe pressure, at least perceived pressure on like my end to be an agent of societal change through my practice, and I think that was something that was preventing me from making for a while, or at least making productively, this burden to be a change maker. And I also got a degree in art in fragile contexts or conflict situations when I was working in Switzerland. And so that is like very directional art practice where it has a function and it has a social function and it's very explicit. And then coming back to my own practice, wondering like what is the role here? And I think where I've settled for now, and maybe that's a selfish or a wrong answer, is that the macro has to be embedded in the micro. And if I can't, that for my own like sustaining of myself and my practice, that I need to do the small research and to think about my role and to process things in that way, to be a whole person and to be a productive person, and then to trust myself to pursue change and to pursue, I don't know, being, I don't know. I feel like there's like this pressure to reconcile your role as an artist and as a change agent, and sometimes nurturing one or nurturing the other leads the other being nurtured, and they don't know that they have to be mashed together all the time to to be the healthiest. Otherwise, maybe you're not making change or making the art that you need to make. So I think that's a question that I struggle with constantly, and I've settled on sort of oscillating between the two, but allowing myself the permission to make work that isn't explicitly directional in that way either. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a terrible answer. I don't know. Lacey, how do you feel?
Yeah, that's definitely something I think we're all struggling with is it kind of feels like, what are we doing if we're not making some sort of bigger commentary on a global perspective? I think basically any of my work kind of starts with personal narrative in some way. And then from there, I kind of position that view and that experience in a global perspective. Like, so this body of work is about losing family members to heroin overdose, but it's also like a societal reflection on the opioid epidemic in America and across the globe. And yeah, I guess that's just kind of how it starts for me, because I feel like sometimes with these larger issues, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's my voice that should be speaking on them necessarily, or making the narrative about them. So a lot of my work stems from personal narrative because it feels like something that I can actually speak on.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I have one from Kathy about the dresses that my grandmother left me and how they were stored and whether they were treasured or if they feel found or fleeting. I don't know. They were bizarrely stored in Ziploc bags underneath boxes and boxes of other things. She was a doctor, and she never took any interest in clothing, so I was really surprised to find them. And she wasn't really someone to archive things, and they were in Ziplocs, which was weird, which means she had archived them recently. So I don't know. I felt like the way that they were stored was causing them to decay a little bit faster than probably she intended. And like I immediately took them out and hung them up because that felt more appropriate. So I don't know how I feel about them, but it's a good question, Kathy. Thank you. And I think Kareen asked us about references to loss or potential loss. And I don't know that we've addressed that. Lacey, do you have any thoughts about that?
Let's see. So she said, there are references to loss or potential loss in relation to family, cousin, grandmother, sister. The notions of family and loss are universal that we all relate to, but do you find that your family members respond to the work differently than the general audience does?
That's a good question.
That is a really good question. So I find it really difficult to talk about my work with my family at all, especially because a lot of times it revolves around my family. And so, yeah, I would say that they would definitely react to the work differently than the general audience. But I don't necessarily always welcome them into that space.
Yeah, mine have no idea what I make. They're very supportive, but I feel like it's private in a way that I don't share with my family. My sister occasionally like catches on to something and she'll like roll her eyes and make like gagging noises. But and my parents, when I was taking that kite piece out, like I didn't perform it all in one day, especially with weather conditions. I had to go probably 12 different days to the speech to be filming. And it weighs like 200 pounds. So my mother would always come with me and she'd help me unload it, put it on the beach, and I'd be like, okay, get out. And she never knew what the piece was about. And at the end, she was like, I think I get it and I think I like it. So I think she's gonna see it eventually. She might come up, but yeah, I tend to keep that part of myself very private, and partly because it's about them, and I don't want to share it. And I think Lacey, we may have that in common a little bit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Unless we have any other questions, or do you guys have any last remaining thoughts or questions for each other? Not hearing any. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Lacey, for your exhibitions in the gallery. We look forward to viewing them over the upcoming weeks. And Thanks again for everyone being here tonight.